You've been in this space for a long time.
Allen Helm is the co-founder of Bitcoin for Corporations, driving global Bitcoin adoption by helping businesses integrate Bitcoin into strategy, operations, and culture.
There's the 4-year cycles of Bitcoin, and each cycle is defined by something that catalysts the bull market. So in 2017, it was the ICO craze. 2020, it was NFTs. This cycle is very clearly defined by institutional integration.
Today, you guys are spending a lot of time on the public side, but I'm curious how you think about not just the 2,000 public companies, but the 2 million private companies sitting below, because that is the next generation, right?
Even though we are focused on public companies, there's a lot of good teachings and learnings, and we invite everybody to come to our symposiums that they can get from these big players in the space. Over the course of a 4-year, 5-year, 10-year duration, you're going to have all these success stories from public to private all the way down, just accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization forward.
So I'd love to kind of just hear a little bit of the story on how you've played a role in making Bitcoin useful for companies in the real world, when quite honestly, for many years, it wasn't.
I think it's a very interesting question.
Hey, so I'm here with Allen talking about Bitcoin for corporations. Allen was one of the founders of an incredible program that now is sitting in conferences all over the world. There are hundreds of companies putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and you played a big role. So I'd love to kind of just hear a little bit of the story on how you've played a role in making Bitcoin useful for companies in the real world, when quite honestly, for many years, it wasn't.
Yeah, well, Jeremy, first off, always great to see you. Thank you for having me on the show. So where are we at in the corporate Bitcoin adoption cycle? I mean, I think it's really important to zoom out. I mean, Bitcoin as a whole is a 16-year-old industry, and it was a grassroots-led movement. I mean, Satoshi himself wrote the code of Bitcoin in the white paper because he was mad at what happened in the '08 financial crisis.
Sure.
And, you know, there's the famous line on the Bitcoin Talk forum, you know, it might just make sense to get some if this thing catches on.
Yep.
Right. And so I think for a lot of individuals who were very hyper aware of some of the financial uncertainties that were going on in the world, it made a lot of sense. And that carried us to, you know, upwards of 100K in adoption. So when you have an asset like that, that surpasses, you know, even and some of the Magnificent Seven companies, right? I think corporations start to look and they, you know, they have to bat an eye at it. And by proxy, so do governments. And so we've seen here in the last 16 months, tremendous acceleration on the corporate Bitcoin narrative. I mean, globally alone, there's been about 12 or 13 changes in legislation. Everything from fair accounting values in the US with FASB, all the way up to banks being able to now custody both in the US and Canada. We have the rise of...
which is wild. Banks are inviting people like you and me into them to talk to their employees about Bitcoin, which is like crazy to think of years ago.
Well, and not only that, I mean, even a year ago for a Bitcoin company to have like $100 million raise, that was a very massive number. And even just yesterday, we had Nakamoto announce that they raised a $5 billion ATM.
That's right.
And you talk to David, he's like, this is just the start. The capital inflows are going to be even more crazy.
That's right.
And so I think, you know, all these changes that we're seeing is really a byproduct of uncertainty with the US dollar, you know, Treasuries not being the, you know, core stable asset for excess cash poured into. And so, you know, us at Bitcoin for Corps, to go back to your original question, we're at this massive influx where retail has carried us to 100K. We have institutions coming in mass because favorable regulation has been passed. Obviously, MicroStrategy is leading the way with 600,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Wild. 3% of the supply apps.
$100 billion market cap company. Can you imagine that a few years ago? It's just crazy.
I mean, Saylor, I want to say it was out of desperation. It was just like a clear line of like, hey, my company, MicroStrategy, focused on business intelligence, has lost footing to the IBMs and the Microsofts of the world. And I have $500 million in cash, and I can either sit on that cash while I'm watching things inflate away and the economy shut down during COVID, or I can park it in Bitcoin. And he took that gamble. And he's really paved the way in the US for other people to come about. And so beyond just the US markets, I mean, we've seen in Japan with MetaPlanet, in Europe with Capital D, formerly as Blockchain Group, and even the Smarter Web Co. You know, see tremendous success in placing Bitcoin as a reserve asset on the balance sheet. And so, yeah, I mean, Bitcoin for corporations as a whole, we saw this coming about 16 months ago. We're domiciled under BTC Inc., which is the parent company of the Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin Conference. And so we have tremendous insights, not only to seeing how the industry has played out over the course of the last 10, 12 years.
Yep.
But we've also made connections with individuals like yourself and other people that are either providing solutions or wanting to get integrated with Bitcoin. And so we identified with Saylor, Saylor came to us with a very simple question, how do we onboard the next 100 publicly traded entities under a corporate Bitcoin Treasury standard? Say that 10 times fast.
Which, by the way, was a wild idea just maybe 2 years ago, right? The idea that there'd be 100 public companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet was like, the Overton window had not switched at that point.
No.
Now where are we at roughly in that?
So 2 years ago, there's roughly about 25 to 30 companies that had Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Probably the biggest player beyond Strategy was Tesla.
Yep.
Of course, you have Jeff Dorsey's Block. But in that time, we've increased to about 172 companies.
Yep.
But there is an even smaller cohort now within that are what we call Bitcoin accreted companies.
Yep.
Or the Bitcoin Treasury companies. So you have Bitcoin holding companies. So maybe do like a one-time buy like Tesla.
Yep.
And then you have what Saylor's doing with the Strategy Playbook, where they are going into capital markets, acquiring Bitcoin either on a weekly or biweekly or monthly cadence, and then using that to bolster up shareholder value. And it's a rinse and repeat. Essentially, you found the infinite money getting glitch for these companies.
And Bitcoin companies are basically stacking sats just in orders of magnitudes larger than a consumer would do.
Exactly.
And I think maybe the zoom out here is, like you said, so 4 years ago, there was less than a handful of companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Then 2 years ago, maybe 20 or so, when you guys started taking a look at the space. Now we're almost at 200. It's an order of magnitude change in 2 years, is what you're saying.
Well, if you were to trend it against the hockey stick that is Bitcoin, it actually follows the trend line pretty well. And I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. I think what was one of the largest barriers for a long time is just the bank's ability to custody Bitcoin. Now you have these financial advisors armed with whatever collateral that, Fidelity, BlackRock is giving them. And on behalf of the retail investor, they are allocating a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% in their portfolios into Bitcoin.
That's right.
And what these financial advisors are going to start seeing is like, oh my gosh, this 5% allocation has grown way more than what I've been doing with the S&P 500 or Mag 7, any of these indices. And so as a catalyst for that, when we're accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization. That's about it. So 200 this year, 400 the next year, 800 the following. It's exponential.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're talking about is like in business tech in general, they say like the consumerization of enterprise. So some cool thing that we do in a consumer retail level, and then enterprise is usually slower to adopt. Mm-hmm. But we're all normal people. You and I are consumers ourselves. So if we adopt the technology and then the enterprise is really like slow to adopt, at some point that comes into the business sense. And so in the same sense, we're all users of a hard asset like Bitcoin. At some point, the CFOs and the financial executives are starting to realize it's a more important asset for them as a company to do capital preservation.
Absolutely.
Where do you so we went from 2 to 20 to 200. Like, what's the view from Bitcoin for Corporation? Do you just say every company is going to be a Bitcoin company eventually, even if they're operating and making widgets and, creating goods and services? Will they too be Bitcoin companies?
I think it's a very interesting question. There's the 4-year cycles of Bitcoin, and each cycle is defined by something that catalysts the bull market, right? So in 2017, it was the ICO craze. 2020, it was NFTs, and all these meme token economics, probably popularized, honestly, by the meme stocks, like, GameStop and AMC and that sort. This cycle is very clearly defined by institutional integration. But like I said, we're 16 years into this experiment. And there's a lot of PTSD from the collapse of FTX in the last cycle. More recently, in the last 2 years, the collapse of Signature Bank and First Bank. And so I think a lot of new entrants and new shareholders, there's a whole new cohort of individuals getting involved with Bitcoin, as is every cycle. But what we're really trying to do at Bitcoin for Corporations is, continue to support these treasury operations, but also pump the brakes and be like, hey, friendly reminder, when you get too greedy, over leveraged, you break down the fiduciary responsibilities you have as a CFO. These are the implications of what can happen. And so it's great that we have regulation happening in the US. It's great that we have MiCA happening in the EU, VASPs here in Hong Kong. But ultimately, there needs to be a regulatory body focused on this stuff. And we want to be ready and prepared for when, a bear market inevitably does come. The Bitcoin for Corporations is that self-regulatory body, and we are ready to codify the standards that we have been set forward for our members, and have that placed into law.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're talking about is what are best practices. So as you do company building, I remember when the companies started engaging in the internet, there was a whole cohort of companies that were maybe good ideas, but weren't necessarily durable, long-lasting companies. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that had to happen was, a set of best practices. What are internet native companies? What are cloud native companies?
Yeah.
And here what you're describing is businesses are figuring out at the leading edge, what does it look like to be able to do this in a responsible capital preservation kind of way? And I think, even for ourselves, we looked at it, and I remember before FASB was sort of enshrined, well, how do you mark this in the books? How do you validate it? Okay, how should we think about mark to market? What is the right allocation strategy for, a company that's maybe not doing just a pure play treasury leverage thing, but you're an operating business? What's the right amount of allocation to do? All of these are new sets of questions. Mm. And I think one of the things it seems like you guys are trying to do is really like have this cohort of organizations who are saying, we believe that this is an asset that's here to stay. Mm-hmm. We believe that it's a superpower to our business in one way, shape, or form. Let's trade notes on the right ways that we can sort of be good operators and grow the ecosystem, because we know if you're at the beginning of a market, whether it's the internet market, the mobile and social market, or the AI market, or here, the foundations of money transforming, like that's really important to business, right?
Absolutely, Jeremy. And, I think what's really important, we get a lot of new CEOs and CFOs, the Russell 2000 cohort, even the Fortune 500. And I can't, name any names specifically, but it is, you got to look at the age cohort of these people, right? Very ingrained in traditional financial markets. They've been either listening to Jamie Dimon called Bitcoin a pet rock. They're not really familiar with the fundamentals of Bitcoin's scarcity aspect, but also the ability of it to be just like individual interest, not seized by banks that you self-custody on.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of CFOs, once they get past the hurdle of understanding what Bitcoin is, the next hurdle is like, well, okay, FASB's been updated and rolled back, but what are the tools for me to go and execute, right?
Yeah.
Like, who are the custodian partners that I need to work with? Like, it's great that these banks, are custodying Bitcoin, but does that mean that Citibank and JP Morgan are doing the same thing? What is US Bank doing? Yeah. Right? And these are all valid questions to ask. And the second question you start asking is, okay, from an auditing and tax and accounting standpoint, should I be working with KPMG? Should I be working with Deloitte? And who are the partners?
Within those teams, it's actually complicated. Who actually knows how to do something that's auditable for a public company or a private company that's about to go public?
Right.
We went through all kinds of what's the right team that knows how to do digitally native ways that is going to pass the audit. Mm-hmm. You guys work with vendors and service providers and partners that are more Bitcoin native.
Yes.
That are able to sort of supercharge the acceleration, the education curve for a lot of these companies as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, like I said, a lot of these service providers have been in the industry for, anywhere from 5 to 10 to even 12 years.
Yeah.
And they've made mistakes along the way that they've learned from.
Yeah.
And they're, with some of these teams, combined experience of like 40, 50 years together.
Yep.
But Deloitte's like a massive organization. And you like, okay, well, who is the crypto and Bitcoin and digital assets team there? Well, it's a team of like 5 people, right?
Yep.
Same thing with MicroStrategy, right? You look at this 2,000 person organization, and they're predominantly focused on business intelligence. And you realize the Bitcoin team, there's only like 7 people on the Treasury team that are managing this.
As I got to notice that team, it's like 1% of the overall org.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating, actually, the interactions between the two groups.
Yeah.
So you're like, one team is so on the bleeding edge, and then they're like trying to orange pill the organization itself.
Yeah.
And even as a company who's Bitcoin native, we've found that same process where you'll have people, when you have hundreds or thousands of employees, you have people who join the company for different reasons. And so even there's an internal education process that has to happen, right? So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's like the next and final step, right? Like we really try to look at things holistically and long-term. And it's orange pilling the C-suite.
Yep.
Then talking to the board, then getting the shareholders on board. And then finally, you want to, educate your employees on that base. And so the final step ultimately is like, what's the benefits package that's going on? Traditionally you have 401k that an employer matches.
Yep.
But the reality is like, even with that match in inflation now, you're better off parking Bitcoin or parking your hard-earned cash into Bitcoin. So that you have real savings passed down to your generations. And so things like Paystan's doing here by creating, a Bitcoin rewards credit card for not just the company to earn rewards, but then like instill that in, employees' minds. That's hyper Bitcoinization at scale, right? And it's not just one avenue. Everyone talks about Bitcoin being grassroots bottom up, but really Bitcoin is this black hole where it might not be that vector what Paystan's doing with the Bitcoin rewards, but it might be, oh, my company valuation went up 250% in a quarter. Like, oh, that's really interesting. Or, hey, I'm an immigrant from, an emerging market economy. I've been educated, I work in a really nice job. But, Venezuela, who has like hyper Bitcoinization, that might be the avenue. And so us being able to enable that for corporations to provide that education to their employees, that's how we get to, essentially Wall Street to Orange Street.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've found is, for years, I would talk about Bitcoin like philosophically, and it was really hard to get people there. And what I've learned over time is the more people use it, touch it, see it in some way, whether it's on their balance sheet and they see that it's, impacts their overall like asset base, or it's, getting paid in Bitcoin, or it's spending, some card in Bitcoin, or it's some education thing, or it's sending money cross border and paying a contract. Like all of these are just ways it becomes real as opposed to becomes philosophy. And I think one of the things I'm excited about is, you're right, it takes time to educate the C-suite, financial professionals, the board, investors. But at the same time, you have a new generation that's coming. And the new generation is, more digitally savvy. They're used to using these products in their daily life. And so it's almost easier to bring up, maybe not the CFO, but the cool VP of finance who's coming up, right? Like, who knows these products. And so today, you guys are spending a lot of time on the public side, but I'm curious how you think about maybe not just the 2,000 public companies, but the 2 million private companies sitting below, like, because that is the next generation, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of ways to think about it. Bitcoin for Corp's predominantly focused on the public side, but if you look at what BTC Inc. is doing, her parent company, with conferences like this, we're in a conference within a conference here. But that is the catalyst for some of these private entities to come into the door. And even though we are focused on public companies, there's a lot of good teachings and learnings, and we invite everybody to come to our symposiums that they can get from these, these big players in the space. And I think ultimately what trickles down, right, as we see, institutions start integrating Bitcoin, not just at the balance sheet level, but maybe even at the employee benefits level, companies that have a positive business line are going to want to accept Bitcoin or their payments and services. Like a perfect example is I was talking to an individual that runs storage facilities on the East Coast and the West Coast. And he's like, I'm not Michael Saylor and I'm not a public company who can tap into equity markets, but I can't accept Bitcoin as payment. And he was telling me just over the course of the last year, by employing that, they've seen, I think it was like a 300 or 400% increase.
That's so cool.
In net revenue.
That's so cool.
And so I think stories like just being able to like tell those stories.
That's right.
And showcase the power of, integrating Bitcoin into your business, but also looking at it through a long-term horizon. That's right. Like if you're like, hey, I'm a struggling business and I need to turn things around in a quarter, Bitcoin could do that right now in a bull cycle, and it could also ruin your business in the long term. But zooming out, integrating, over the course of a 4-year, 5-year, 10-year duration, you're going to have all these success stories from public to private all the way down. And again, just accelerating Bitcoinization forward.
I love it. I love it. So you've been in this space for a long time. You're now seeing it sort of cross the chasm on the corporate side, which is so cool. You and I kind of share in different ways the same passion that if you change that, it's actually going to have a huge impact back in the overall economy and the ecosystem. So thank you for what you do. It's really cool.
Thanks, Jeremy.
If there are, whether it's the capital markets that follow this, or public CEOs or other large companies that are really trying to figure it out, where should they learn more about Bitcoin for corporations? How do they get a hold of you or the team?
Yeah, for sure. So you can visit b.tc/corporations to learn about it. You can follow us on X, on LinkedIn, Facebook. We're all around the social platforms. But go to the website, look at some of the events we're putting on. We bring great individuals like yourself to our events.
Or we tag along. I'm like a roadie, I think, at these shows.
You're my biggest supporter, Jaden. I appreciate it. But great individuals like yourself who are building real tools to help accelerate corporate Bitcoin adoption are present at these events. And so I encourage everybody to go to the website. You know, if we're in your local area, we do events in Amsterdam, Abu Dhabi, Las Vegas. We're here in Hong Kong. And then we do partner events around the world too, in Prague, DC, New York. So, I mean, we're all over the place. We'll come to your city at some point, but come to one of the events. And if you can't make it to one of the events, go to our YouTube, look at the hundreds of thousands of hours that we have on just people talking about corporate Bitcoin adoption and regional aspects of it.
Yeah.
So look at all that. You know, we're open and ready to talk to anybody, whether you're private or public entity. And yeah, we're always happy to chat with them.
I love it. I love it. Well, follow Allen, go to the website. No one's probably doing more to drive corporate adoption and cross the chasm to make Bitcoin useful for real companies than this guy. So appreciate your time, brother.
Jeremy, sure, appreciate you. Thank you.